I hung up the phone, my hands trembling as the weight of Aunt Miriam's words sank in. "I'm cutting you out of my will. After how you treated me, you deserve nothing." The line went dead, but her bitter condemnation echoed in my mind. Kyle stormed into the living room, his face flushed with anger. What did that old bat say now? I swallowed hard, bracing myself for his outburst. She's taking me out of her will, cutting me off completely. What? Kyle slammed his fist on the coffee table, making me flinch. After everything we've done for her? The ungrateful hag! My chest tightened as memories of Aunt Miriam's kindness resurfaced. She had been more of a mother to me than my own parents, taking me in after their tragic deaths. Her home became my sanctuary, her love a constant in my turbulent childhood. But that love had twisted into resentment over the years, poisoned by Kyle's relentless demands for money and favors. I had gone along, too weak to stand up to him and his overbearing parents. "This is your fault," Kyle spat, his eyes blazing with accusation. "You never stood up for us, never fought for what's ours." Shame washed over me as I recalled the countless times I had enabled his greed, sacrificing my bond with Aunt Miriam for his empty promises of a lavish inheritance. I had been a coward, too afraid to defy him and lose the illusion of wealth he dangled before me. "We're not going to take this lying down," Kyle snarled, his voice laced with determination. "That money is rightfully ours, and we're going to get it back, one way or another." As he stormed out, I sank onto the couch, my mind racing with memories of Aunt Miriam's unwavering love and support. How had I let it come to this? How had I allowed myself to become so consumed by greed and selfishness, betraying the woman who had given me everything? The weight of my guilt was suffocating, but deep down I knew the truth. I had brought this upon myself, and as the gravity of my actions settled in, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to undo the damage I had caused, or if I had lost Aunt Miriam forever. The apartment felt suffocating, the weight of Aunt Miriam's rejection pressing down on me. I needed air, an escape from Kyle's seething rage and the memories that taunted me. Grabbing my coat, I slipped out, the crisp night offering a fleeting reprieve. As I wandered aimlessly, flashes of my childhood flickered through my mind. The night Dad didn't come home from work, Mom's anguished sobs as the police delivered the tragic news. The deafening silence that followed, an emptiness no 9-year-old should ever have to endure. Then Aunt Miriam's warm embrace, her gentle voice soothing my fears. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I'm here for you." She had been my lifeline, my anchor in the storm that threatened to sweep me away. Her modest home became a sanctuary, filled with the love and stability I had so desperately craved. But even then, the seeds of greed had taken root, planted by Kyle's manipulative parents. "That old lady's loaded," they would sneer. "Just you wait, Trina. One day, that fortune will be yours." Foolishly, I had let their poisonous words take hold, blinding me to Miriam's unconditional love. And as the years passed, Kyle's demands grew more insistent, his parents' influence more toxic. "She owes us," he would snarl, his eyes glinting with avarice. "After everything we've done for her, sacrificing our own lives to take care of that ungrateful hag." I knew it was a lie, a twisted justification for his greed. But I was too weak, too afraid to stand up to him, to risk losing the illusion of wealth he dangled before me like a carrot on a string. "Trina, darling," Aunt Miriam would plead, her eyes brimming with hurt. "I've given you everything I have. Why isn't it enough?" But her words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by Kyle's incessant demands and the siren song of his parents' promises of riches beyond my wildest dreams. Now, as I wandered the empty streets, the weight of my betrayal threatened to crush me. I had sacrificed the one person who had truly loved me, the one constant in my life, for the hollow allure of material wealth. Aunt Miriam's words echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the depth of my transgression. "You deserve nothing." And in that moment, I knew she was right. I had brought this upon myself, and the only one to blame was the person staring back at me in the cold, unforgiving reflection of the storefront window. The sound of Aunt Miriam's labored breathing filled the stifling hospital room. I shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair, guilt gnawing at my insides as I watched her frail form struggle for each ragged breath. "You came," she whispered, her eyes flickering open, a glimmer of hope in their tired depths. I forced a smile, unable to meet her gaze. "Of course, Aunt Miriam. Where else would I be?" Her bony hand trembled as she reached for mine, and I flinched, the weight of my deceit threatening to crush me. "I'm so sorry, dear," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for things to end up like this." My throat constricted, the words I longed to say, the apology I owed her, stuck like shards of glass. But Kyle's voice echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the price of defiance. "Don't be ridiculous," I managed, forcing a hollow laugh. "You've done more than enough for me already." Aunt Miriam's face fell, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I wanted to give you everything, Trina, to make up for all the heartache you've endured." The guilt was suffocating, a vice around my chest that squeezed tighter with each shallow breath she took. I should have been the one comforting her, reassuring her that her love and support had been enough, more than enough. But the words never came. Instead, I sat in silence, a coward too afraid to break free from the chains of greed that bound me. Later that night, as Aunt Miriam slept fitfully, Kyle stormed into the room, his face contorted with rage. "Well?" he hissed, his eyes darting to the fragile figure in the hospital bed. "Did you get through to her? Make her see reason?" I shook my head, unable to meet his accusatory glare. "Useless," he spat, slamming his fist against the wall. "We're running out of time, Trina. That money is ours, and I'm not going to let some senile old bat stand in our way." His words cut deep, but I knew there was truth in them. We had sacrificed too much, endured too many years of her empty promises and hollow gratitude. It was time to take matters into our own hands. As Kyle ranted, his voice rising with each venomous syllable, I caught a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. Aunt Miriam's lids fluttered open, her gaze locking onto mine, a lifetime of hurt and betrayal reflected in those weary eyes. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. The fragile bond between us, once so strong and unbreakable, had been severed. And as the harsh reality of my actions washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if I had lost her forever. The shrill ring of the phone sliced through the tense silence, shattering the fragile calm that had settled over our apartment. Kyle shot me a pointed glare as I reached for the receiver, his jaw clenched in silent warning. "Hello?" My voice trembled with trepidation. "Trina?" The nurse's voice was grave, laced with urgency. "It's your Aunt Miriam. There's been an incident. You need to come to the hospital right away." My heart plummeted, a cold dread washing over me. "What happened? Is she okay?" A weighted pause then. "She's fallen. Hit her head pretty hard. The doctors are doing everything they can, but—" She trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The line went dead, but the implications lingered, a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. I turned to Kyle, my mouth dry, struggling to find the words. "Well?" he snapped, his eyes narrowing with impatience. "What is it?" "It's Aunt Miriam," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. She's hurt. Bad." For a fleeting moment, a flicker of concern crossed his features, quickly extinguished by the ever-present hunger that burned in his eyes. "How bad?" he demanded, leaning forward, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrests of his chair. I swallowed hard, the gravity of the situation threatening to crush me. "They didn't say, just that we need to get to the hospital right away?" Kyle's nostrils flared, his lips curling into a sneer. "Of course they didn't," he spat, rising to his feet with a suddenness that made me flinch. "They're probably just trying to milk us for more money, the vultures." His words hung in the air, a bitter accusation that stung like a slap to the face. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my tongue, withering under the weight of his scathing glare. "Well?" he barked, grabbing his coat from the rack with a forceful tug. "Are you coming or not? We can't let this opportunity slip through our fingers." Opportunity. The word left a sour taste in my mouth, a stark reminder of the depths to which we had sunk. Aunt Miriam was lying in a hospital bed, her life hanging in the balance, and all Kyle could think about was the inheritance that dangled before us like a tantalizing prize. But what choice did I have? I had made my bed long ago, sacrificing my principles and self-respect for the hollow promise of wealth and security. And now, as the consequences of my actions loomed ever closer, I found myself trapped, a prisoner of my own greed and cowardice. With leaden steps, I followed Kyle out the door, the weight of my guilt growing heavier with each stride. As we made our way to the hospital, the silence between us was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional muttered curse or impatient sigh. And through it all, a single thought echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain that chilled me to the core. What had I done? The antiseptic stench of the hospital corridor assaulted my senses as we made our way down the sterile hallway, each step echoing like a death knell. Kyle strode ahead, his gait determined, his eyes fixed on the prize that lay beyond the closed door at the end of the corridor. I trailed behind, my footsteps leaden, weighed down by the guilt that threatened to consume me. Aunt Miriam's fragile form flashed before my eyes, a haunting reminder of the depths to which I had sunk in my pursuit of her wealth. As we neared the room, the muffled sounds of voices drifted through the door. Nurses and doctors, their tones hushed and grave. A knot twisted in my stomach, but Kyle pressed on, undeterred. Without preamble, he flung open the door, the hinges protesting with a shrill creak. All eyes turned towards us, a dozen faces etched with shock and disapproval. "Well?" Kyle barked, his gaze sweeping the room with a callous indifference. "What are you all gawking at? Where is she?" A nurse stepped forward, her expression a mixture of pity and thinly veiled disdain. "Mrs. Winslow is resting," she said, her voice clipped. "She's been through quite an ordeal and needs her rest." Kyle scoffed, brushing past her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Resting? She'll have plenty of time for that once we get her affairs in order." My heart hammered in my chest as he approached the bed, his shadow looming over Aunt Miriam's frail form. She looked so small, so vulnerable, her face pale and drawn, marred by a vivid purple bruise that bloomed across her forehead. "Aunt Miriam," Kyle crooned, his tone sickly sweet. "It's us, your favorite niece and nephew." Her eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused. A flicker of recognition passed across her features, quickly extinguished by a wince of pain. "Kyle," she rasped, her voice little more than a whisper. "Trina, you came." "Of course we did," Kyle replied, shooting me a pointed glare. "We're family after all, and family looks out for one another, don't they?" A tremor ran through me as the implication of his words sank in. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to secure our future once and for all. "That's why," Kyle continued, his tone taking on a harder edge, "we need to have a little chat about your affairs, your will, your assets, everything." Aunt Miriam's brow furrowed, her eyes growing wide with alarm. "My will?" she echoed, her voice trembling. But I thought—" "You thought what?" Kyle snapped, his veneer of concern cracking like a brittle mask. "That we'd just let you squander everything you've worked for? That we'd stand idly by while you frittered it all away on frivolous nonsense?" His words hung in the air, a damning accusation that cut straight to the bone. I wanted to protest, to defend Aunt Miriam's honor, but the words stuck in my throat, choked by the weight of my own complicity. As Kyle raged on, his voice rising to a fever pitch, I caught sight of the nurse hovering nearby, her expression a mixture of horror and disgust. In that moment, I knew we had crossed a line, one from which there was no turning back. And as the harsh reality of our actions washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if we had finally gone too far, if the price of our greed was too steep, even for us. The crisp autumn air did little to soothe the burning ache in my chest as I made my way up the familiar path to Aunt Miriam's home. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the burden of shame and regret that had become my constant companion. As the stately manor came into view, memories assailed me, happy times spent in its warmth and comfort before greed had poisoned everything. I could almost hear the echoes of Aunt Miriam's laughter, the gentle melodies she would hum as she tended to her beloved garden. But those days were gone, lost to the relentless march of time and our own selfish desires. The door swung open before I could raise my hand to knock, and there she stood, Aunt Miriam, her once vibrant eyes now dulled by a mix of sorrow and resignation. "Trina," she said, her voice little more than a hoarse whisper, "I've been expecting you." I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I possibly say to undo the hurt, the betrayal we had inflicted upon her? "Come in," she sighed, turning and disappearing into the dimly lit interior. I followed, each step feeling like a descent into the depths of my own personal hell. The once inviting foyer was now a mausoleum, the air thick with the weight of shattered dreams and broken promises. Aunt Miriam sank into her favorite armchair, her movements slow and labored, a stark contrast to the vibrant woman I remembered. She gestured for me to sit, her gaze unwavering, piercing straight through to my soul. "I know why you're here," she said, her voice barely audible above the ticking of the grandfather clock. "You want to know about the will." My heart hammered in my chest, the familiar ache of greed and longing stirring within me. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to secure our future once and for all. But as I opened my mouth to speak, Aunt Miriam raised a trembling hand, silencing me before the words could leave my lips. "Don't bother," she said, her eyes hardening with a resolve I had never seen before. "I've made my decision, and nothing you or that wretched husband of yours can say will change it." A chill ran down my spine, her words cutting deeper than any knife. This was no idle threat. I could see it in the set of her jaw, the steely determination that burned in her gaze. "You're cutting us out?" I managed, my voice little more than a strangled whisper. Aunt Miriam's lips curved into a humorless smile, a bitter twist of the knife. "Cutting you out?" she echoed, her tone laced with a mix of pity and contempt. "My dear, you cut yourselves out long ago, the moment you decided that money and possessions were more important than family, than love." Her words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs and leaving me gasping for air. I wanted to protest, to defend our actions, but deep down, I knew she was right. We had brought this upon ourselves, sacrificing everything that truly mattered for the hollow allure of wealth and status. As the weight of her condemnation settled over me, I felt the last vestiges of hope slip away, replaced by a cold, bitter resignation. We had played the game, and we had lost. Spectacularly, irrevocably. And as I looked into Aunt Miriam's eyes, I saw not anger or hatred, but a profound sadness, a mourning for the family we had once been, and the love we had so carelessly squandered. In that moment, I knew there was no going back, no undoing the damage we had wrought. The only path left was forward, into the desolate wasteland of our own making. The deafening silence that hung over our apartment was suffocating, broken only by the occasional muffled sob or the clink of a glass against the coffee table. Kyle sat hunched in his chair, his eyes glazed and unfocused, a half-empty tumbler of amber liquid clutched in his trembling hand. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his words slurred and thick. "Not after everything we've sacrificed." I said nothing, my own grief and shame rendering me mute. Aunt Miriam's words echoed in my mind, a damning refrain that played on an endless loop. "You cut yourselves out long ago." How had it come to this? How had our relentless pursuit of wealth and status twisted us into the very monsters we had sworn never to become? A bitter chuckle escaped Kyle's lips, jarring me from my reverie. "Well," he sneered, fixing me with a glare that cut straight to the bone. "Aren't you going to say something? Or are you just going to sit there like a pathetic lump, as useless as ever?" I flinched, his words like a physical blow. A part of me wanted to lash out, to defend myself against his vitriol, but what was the point? He was right. I was useless, a coward too afraid to stand up to him and his insatiable greed. "We're not going to let this stand, you know," he growled, slamming his glass down with such force that I half expected it to shatter. "That money is ours. Damn it. We've earned it, sacrificed everything for it." A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Earned it?" I echoed, my voice dripping with contempt. "Is that what you call it? Leeching off of Aunt Miriam's generosity, bleeding her dry with our constant demands and ingratitude?" Kyle's eyes widened, his face flushing with rage. "How dare you?" he spat, surging to his feet and looming over me like a menacing shadow. "After everything I've done for you, for this family?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "You mean everything you've done to tear this family apart?" I shot back, my own anger rising to the surface like a tidal wave. "Face it, Kyle, we brought this on ourselves. We let greed and selfishness consume us, and now we're paying the price." His hand lashed out, the back of his palm connecting with my cheek with a sickening crack. I recoiled, stars exploding across my vision as the metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled, towering over me like a wrathful giant. "After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me." I said nothing, cradling my throbbing cheek as the weight of his words washed over me. He was right. He had given me everything, or at least the illusion of it. A life of comfort and luxury, dangled before me like a carrot on a string, always just out of reach. And in my desperation to grasp it, I had sacrificed the one thing that truly mattered: my integrity, my soul. As Kyle raged on, his voice rising to a fever pitch, I felt something within me shift, a profound weariness settling over me like a shroud. I was done, finished with the lies and the endless cycle of greed and recrimination. Slowly, I rose to my feet, my movements steady and resolute. Kyle fell silent, his eyes narrowing with suspicion as I met his gaze, unflinching. "It's over, Kyle," I said, my voice low but laced with a steely determination. "No more begging, no more pleading. We made our bed, and now we have to lie in it." His lips curled into a sneer, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the first cracks in his armor of bravado. "You're really going to let that old hag win?" He spat, his words laced with venom. "After everything we've been through?" I said nothing, simply turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in his own bitter juices. It was time to start over, to rebuild from the ashes of our shattered dreams and broken promises. And this time, I vowed, greed and selfishness would have no place in my life. This time, I would be the master of my own destiny. The harsh glare of the neon open sign cast a sickly glow over the dingy diner, its flickering light a beacon for the weary souls who sought refuge within its cracked vinyl booths. I slid into one of the worn seats, the faded upholstery creaking in protest beneath my weight. The waitress, a world-weary woman with eyes like smudged charcoal, ambled over, her pen poised over a grease-stained pad. "What'll it be, hon?" she drawled, her voice a raspy monotone. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat, a lump of shame and regret rendering me mute. How had it come to this? How had I fallen so far from the gilded halls of opulence to the grim underbelly of despair? The waitress arched an eyebrow, her patience wearing thin. "Look, sweetheart, I ain't got all night. You want something or not?" I forced a nod, my throat constricting as I choked out the words. "Just coffee, black." She shrugged, scribbling on her pad before shuffling away, leaving me alone with the weight of my thoughts. Aunt Miriam's face flashed before my mind's eye, her once vibrant features etched with disappointment and sorrow. "You cut yourselves out long ago," she had said, her words a death knell for our dreams of wealth and comfort. And she had been right. We had brought this upon ourselves, sacrificing everything for the hollow allure of material gain. Now, as the bitter consequences of our actions bore down upon us, I found myself adrift, cast out into the unforgiving wilderness with nothing but the tattered remnants of my pride. The clink of ceramic against formica jolted me from my reverie. The waitress had returned, a steaming mug of black coffee in her hand. She set it down with a thud, sloshing some of the inky liquid over the rim and onto the battered tabletop. "There you go, hon," she muttered, already turning away. "Holler if you need anything else." I nodded numbly, my fingers curling around the warm mug as if seeking solace in its simple familiarity. As the rich aroma wafted up, mingling with the stale scent of grease and despair, a memory surfaced, unbidden. Aunt Miriam's kitchen, the gentle clatter of dishes and the comforting gurgle of the coffee pot, her soft humming, a soothing melody that would chase away the shadows of my turbulent childhood, the warmth of her embrace, her whispered words of love and reassurance. A solitary tear traced its way down my cheek, mingling with the bitter brew as I raised the mug to my lips. How I had squandered that love, trampled upon it in my blind pursuit of riches and status. The diner door swung open with a jangle, admitting a gust of chill night air and a familiar figure. Kyle, his once immaculate suit now rumpled and stained, his eyes hollow and haunted. He spotted me, his lips curling into a sneer as he made his way over, his gait unsteady. Well, he slurred, sliding into the booth across from me, "if it isn't the prodigal wife, slumming it with the dregs of society." I said nothing, simply took another sip of my coffee, the bitter liquid scalding my tongue. Kyle leaned forward, his breath hot and sour with the reek of cheap whiskey. "What's the matter, Trina?" he taunted, his voice dripping with venom. "Cat got your tongue? Or have you finally realized the depths of your failure, your utter uselessness?" His words cut deep, but I refused to rise to the bait. I had heard it all before, endured his vitriol and abuse for far too long. "You know," he continued, his eyes glinting with malice, "we could have had it all, everything we ever wanted, everything we deserved. But you just had to go and ruin it, didn't you?" I met his gaze, unflinching. I ruined it? I echoed, my voice low but laced with steel. Or did we ruin it together with our greed and selfishness? Kyle recoiled as if struck, his bravado faltering for the briefest of moments. But the mask quickly slipped back into place, his features twisting into a sneer of contempt. "Don't try to pin this on me, you pathetic excuse for a wife," he spat, his words laced with venom. "This is all on you, and you know it." I shook my head, a weary sigh escaping my lips. "Keep telling yourself that, Kyle, but we both know the truth. We did this to ourselves, and now we're paying the price." His fist slammed down on the table, rattling the cheap crockery and drawing the attention of the few other patrons. "Shut your mouth," he snarled, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Just shut your damn mouth before I—" But I never got to hear the rest of his threat. With a sudden, decisive motion, I drained the last of my coffee, set the mug down with a hollow clink, and rose to my feet. "Save it, Kyle," I said, my voice laced with a calm finality. "I'm done. Done with your threats, your abuse, your endless cycle of blame and recrimination." His mouth worked soundlessly, his bravado stripped away to reveal the pathetic, broken shell of a man beneath. "I'm starting over," I continued, straightening my shoulders and meeting his gaze head-on. "And this time, I'm doing it on my own terms, without you, without the poison of greed and selfishness that nearly destroyed me." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Kyle to stew in his own bitter juices. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to atone for my mistakes, to rebuild from the ashes of my shattered dreams. And this time, I vowed, I would do it right.